Hey BookTube, it's Angie. In this video I wanted to talk about a few reading recommendations for younger readers, little ones that are just starting to read. I also have a couple of entering middle grade reads for you guys. I thought some of you might have an interest in this because the thing with Black History Month is it is a time for the Black community to celebrate their culture, but it's also a time for everyone, regardless of race, to be educated on Black history. So whether you're Black or not, these should interest you. They're good recommendations to expose everyone to the culture and just, be introduced to some really good writing. The first one I have to mention is The Steel Pan Man of Harlem by Colin Bootman. This is probably going to have a little bit of a glare, sorry about that. This is a African-American retelling of the Pied Piper of Hamelin story. If you hear knocking or rattling in the background, my little dog is playing with his bone and he's throwing it down the hall, so that's what that noise is. This basically tells the same story, from the Pied Piper of Hamelin, but this one takes it back to Harlem Renaissance, one of my favorite periods of history to read about because there were just so many amazing writers and artists that came out of that time. And this, instead of the Pied Piper playing a flute, I believe he played in the original, in this one they play the steel pan drum. The inspiration for that is the author, Colin Bootman. Let's see if I can get him in the shot there. He actually grew up in the Caribbean. I believe he said he grew up in the Caribbean and later moved to New York, but wanted to write something that honored his childhood and his heritage. So he came up with this idea. The story itself is pretty much straightforward, the same. The main difference is it's set in Harlem instead of England, I think the first one was. But the elements are about the same. But the reason I recommend this is because of the really vibrant artwork. Just the different culture aspect is really cool. I'm just trying to think, like they have these scenes of dancing that are really amazing and have a lot of movement. I'll show you. This shot here was actually one of my favorite illustrations in the book. This is when the mayor tries to get out of paying the Pied Piper, or in this case the Steel Pan Man. And if you look at the bottom, it says, "The man's eyes were no longer cheerful. He turned and walked away." And just get a close-up of that guy's face. He is not playing around anymore. And if you know this story, you know what happens after that. But just all the colors in this book are really amazing. So yes, definitely recommend that one for, children that are just starting to learn how to read. Get them interested in that. Another one I would highly recommend is Mama, I'll Give You the World by Ronnie Shotter and S. Saleh Gallagher. This is another picture book, children's picture book. And I'll show you some of the... This one has really cute illustrations. And this one tells the story of... It's from a little girl's point of view whose mother... Her mother works in a beauty parlor. This little girl comes home from school every day and meets her mom at the beauty parlor. Every day she watches her mom work these really long hours at the beauty parlor, and the mother puts all her tips away in this little envelope, and she puts it away for the girl's college fund later. The little girl knows her mother's birthday is coming up, so she decides she wants to do something really special for her, but she wants to keep it a surprise, and so she goes to all her mother's clients in the beauty parlor and gets them all together to put together a surprise for her mom, because the little girl mentions in the book that her mom is a really hard worker. She's a single mom. She does anything for her, but she's like, I hardly ever see my mom smile anymore. And she's so pretty when she smiles, and I never get to see that anymore. So I want to do something to make her smile again. So it's this really heartwarming story about this little girl who just wants her mom to find her light again. She does everything she can as a little girl, making like homemade cards and talking about good times and just her, childhood energy. It's just really, really sweet. And the illustrations are adorable, with her talking to all the people to get this surprise together. And I think this one may take place in New York as well. I don't want to show you too many illustrations at the end because I don't want to give away the surprise she pulls off. But yes, very adorable. Getting into more elementary school, middle grade age, I would recommend the 100 Penny Box. This is by Sharon Bell Mathis. I don't know if I've talked about this on my channel before. I feel like I might have mentioned it before, but maybe not. But I had to go digging through my shelves, like back in the archives of my bookshelves, because I couldn't remember where I put this. But this one is kind of a one that's personally important to me because it's one of the first books I ever wrote like a really in-depth book report on. I think the first time I read this, it was 4th grade. My teacher assigned it, and it was through this book that I wrote my first book report, and my teacher came to me and said, you know, you kind of have a way of with words for someone of your age. And that reading this book and reading the way it was worded and being inspired by that and learning how to frame my own thoughts and everything, this was one of the books I remember being really pivotal in making me interested in words and stories and cultures. And you know, it's really pivotal now that you know I've been a book blogger for so long, since like the early 2000s now, and I always remember this book. And this is another really touching story, but with a little bit of sadness in it though, because it has to do with this little boy, Michael, who spends a lot of time with his grandmother? No, not grandmother. Great-great aunt. He spends a lot of time with his great-great aunt, this woman, Dew, who is 100 years old, and she has this box that she keeps where she has a penny from every year that she's been alive. She and Michael have this thing they do where Michael will bring the box out and he'll pick any penny in the box and she'll tell a story from that time in her life. It's just something that really bonds him to her, and they just have a really special relationship. But there's also a side to Dew that is kind of hinting that maybe she's losing her mental faculties a little bit, and Michael's mother she's kind of trying to be realistic about it and saying, you know, maybe we need to put her in a home, and maybe you shouldn't spend so much time with her because she's not all there now. The story kind of has a turning point when Michael's mother tries to get rid of the box and say, you know, this is stupid. She's probably just making it up. Who remembers these things? And you're buying into it. Michael is really adamant about holding on to this box because he somehow, even though he's really young, understands that, you know, this is kind of a person's memories and in a way kind of their soul locked into these memories. And you know, when you have someone that is maybe starting to slip mentally, getting to that age where they're starting to fall into senility, anything that can anchor them is incredibly important. So it deals with some tough topics, but it's really beautifully written and really touching, and would definitely recommend this. And again, this one has some really nice illustrations. They're a little bit different because they're all done in this sort of sepia type dark brown. They almost look like old photographs in a way, but still really nice. Like just the detail on the face there is amazing. So yes, would definitely recommend that one. Another one, a new one I would recommend is, I was recently sent this one for review and think it would do well in this list. This is Mr. Zip and the Capital Z by Kimberly Bryant-Palmer. I think this was published just recently, actually. Let me check the publication. Yes, this came out last year. This has to do with a little boy named Peanut. Everybody in Peanut's family has a little bit of a different sort of name, and they all have stories behind their unusual names. This starts with Peanut having an incident around the 4th of July weekend. Something happens, he gets in trouble with his parents. He gets punished, he does his punishment, but he's still feeling pretty bad about it. And so he's wandering around town feeling sorry for himself, and he stumbles upon this building or this business that he doesn't remember being in town before, and he walks in and meets Mr. Zip, and the place is called the Capital Z. What it turns out to be is this sort of museum of all these moments in history, and they have all these what initially look like artifacts, but Mr. Zip calls them historical reminders. They're not the actual artifacts, but they're just things to remind us of our history. If you're wondering why I'm recommending this one, I guess I didn't mention it, but the family and the main character in here are African Americans. That's why I was mentioning this on the list. One of the historical reminders that Peanut comes across actually belonged, it has a tag on it that said it belonged to a Milkweed Johnson, which Mr. Zip explains, oh, well, that's actually your like great 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 uncle. I think in the story, through this character, Peanut learns about not only his ancestor, but also Andrew Jackson and the War of 1812. Through another story, he learns about George Washington at Valley Forge. There's also a little bit of a Christianity vein in this, so they do talk about biblical stories as well as like the Ark and the Tower of Babel and things like that. But what I really liked about this story was not only is it very sweetly written, there's a lot of action, it moves very quickly, and just the writing style itself is very sweet and kind of fable-like in a way. There's a little bit of magic to it. I would kind of liken it, at least the tone, not necessarily the plot, but the tone of it reminded me a little bit of a combination of Excellent Adventure and Mr. Megorium's Magic Emporium, that kind of feel, because Peanut sees that whenever he touches something in the capital Z and he and Mr. Zip start talking about it, then he finds himself transported to that actual time. The moment is actually happening in front of him. And he actually gets to see like George Washington and his relatives and things like that. The one thing I really liked about this one, though, that really stood out to me was I really liked the fact that the historical stories, while they're also there to teach the history itself, the thing that impressed me was that because Peanut comes in with this feeling of remorse and guilt because of what he did and how he got in trouble with his parents, Mr. Zip uses the historical stories to teach Peanut that nobody is perfect, and even the most revered historical figures had moments where they seriously screwed up and they let down a lot of people, and they were still able to come back from it. They were still able to make amends and make things right. Mr. Zip uses the stories to teach Peanut that the important thing is you allow yourself to be human and you allow yourself to make mistakes, and when you do make mistakes, you are mature enough and bold enough to go to whoever you wronged and say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, and do it in the moment. Don't do it way later, which I think is an incredibly important lesson to teach young readers, that the sooner you address a wrong, the better it's for everyone. The quicker it can be righted. Generally, the more respect you will earn from people. So a lot of good lessons here that I would definitely recommend. Then the very last one I have to talk about, at least in this video, is I would recommend getting a copy of The Dreamkeeper and Other Poems by Langston Hughes. Can't go wrong with Langston Hughes. He's a brilliant poet, or I guess I should say he was a brilliant poet since he's no longer alive. This one is nice for younger readers because it takes a lot of his poems and puts in illustrations. This collection features a lot of his shorter poems, so it's nice because if younger readers are kind of scared off by poetry, if they think they're not advanced enough for poetry in general, this one is nice because they are shorter ones. Langston Hughes has a way of writing that is very, I don't want to say simplistic, but it's like simplified, maybe is the word, where it's very straightforward. He doesn't use overcomplicated language, but he just gets to the very heart of things with very honest, everyday sort of language. And this one has really nice illustrations. They kind of look like woodcuts, maybe. Just to give you an idea, I thought I would read a couple of them. They're really short. One in here called The Minstrel Man. It says, "Because my mouth is wide with laughter, and my throat is deep with song, you do not think that I suffer after I held my pain so long. Because my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry. Because my feet are gay with dancing, do you not think I die?" This one I would say maybe not for younger readers because they might be a little bit confused, but if you're in like later elementary school, middle grade years, this would probably be a good way to introduce them. This was one of the first ones I ever learned of Langston Hughes, and it's arguably maybe one of his most famous poems, and this is Mother to Son. "Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time I's been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back, and don't you set down on the steps, 'cause you find it's harder. Don't you fall down now, for I's going, honey. I's a-climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair." Which I think, leaves readers with a good motto of pushing forward, because for most of us, life is no crystal stair, and you just have to keep pushing on and pushing up and pushing through. So I thought I would recommend those for Black History Month to introduce you or your child to some Black History Month inspired reading. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know if you have any suggestions in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.